Do you hear it? Do you feel that silence? Everything comes from that silence. This realization unfolded for me in a series of stages spanning my life. This is my journey thus far. The first chapter of my life was devoted to the making of music, to the formation of sounds, and to the delivery of musical compositions for the delight of others and myself. After 15 years of extensive study, I came into contact with the source of music, the silence. That life-changing experience then evolved into the next chapter of my life, which brought about the realization that everything, not just music, comes from silence. Now come with me and hear my story on that moment when I discovered silence. This was about 10 years ago, my early 20s. I was studying at the Eastman School of Music, one of the top music schools in this country, in Rochester, New York. I was studying under Bonita Boyd, a world-renowned classical flutist and teacher. During my second year there, one evening, I went into the practice rooms as usual, and I brought out my flute. And I had been trained up until that point to use every minute to develop some skill, or to memorize a piece, or to do something to fulfill my overall dream, which was to be a phenomenal flutist and to play in one of the top orchestras. But for whatever reason, that evening, I was driven by something deeper, by a deeper impulse. So I took out my flute, but I left my music in my bag. And I turned off the light. And I allowed myself this time of no commentary, no editing from my mind. It was just a free zone. And I allowed myself to play whatever came. Like this. And in that state, I began to observe more abstract levels of music. It was so enjoyable. Instead of connecting with the music, I began to connect with the experience of sound, with the experience of the formation of sound. And this process was so fascinating to me that I slowed things down so I could really appreciate that moment when one sound became another. Like this. I slowed it down to such an extent that I could hardly tell where one sound began and where another left off. So then I had the thought, well, what if I took just one sound? Maybe I could slow it down and play with it so I could observe where that one sound, how it came into form and how it dissolved. So I took just one note and I played with it like this. That's when it happened. That's when I discovered that sound had a source. It had its source in silence. It's that silence that's organizing all the expressions of music. And it's silence that gives the value to each sound that comes out. I also saw that the skill of the musician depends on how connected they are to that source. We know that it's much more than a piece of music that moves us. It's the musician behind that piece of music. And the more that musician is plugged into silence, the deeper that experience of music or art, whatever it may be. From there, I entered the second chapter of my life, which was research into silence. Shortly after that moment in the practice room, I started practicing transcendental meditation. This is a process by which we utilize a sound called a mantra to guide the awareness to subtler experiences of thought, to finer levels of thought, until one transcends thought completely and experiences silence, the source of thought. Little did I realize at that time in the practice room that I had tapped into that mechanism, sound. Sound is a very powerful mechanism for guiding the awareness to source within. That practice of meditation is what brought me to Fairfield. This was the only place in the country, in the world, where you could study science, the science of consciousness or of silence. So I became a student at in the master's degree program. And although it took a while to really dive into that silence and to become familiar with it, now I can share with you that over a series of about 10 years, I've become very familiar with this experience of diving within and then of producing something from within that silence. Well, through the course of my study, I came to learn that field of silence is not an inert, dead, flat field. It's lively, it's dynamic, and it contains within it all the organizing power of everything that we experience. Let me give you a clear example. Right now, I can't predict what's going to come out of my mouth. I cannot predict the exact wording that will come out as speech. What's organizing that is an underlying field of intelligence that can convey my meaning and bring it out in such a way that you can understand what I wish to communicate with you. Something else has to be accounted for, which is organizing that process. It's automatic. The more we tap into that field, the more organized, the more creative we are, the more perfect everything is. And it's delightful. Now, everyone at this university, Maharishi University Management, dives within regularly to experience the silence using transcendental meditation. Every student in Maharishi Vedic Science learns another technique called reading Vedic literature. This is also a sound-based technique. And the theory is this. There are certain individuals, great men on this planet, whose consciousness was so developed that they could go to that field of science, of silence, and see within it the structures that are organizing every expression. Their nervous system could stabilize in that level of silence. And from that level, they could speak out the sounds of that field. The sounds come out as a precise sequence of sound, silence, sound, silence, until we have a collection of what we call the Vedic literature. I became so excited by this technique that I decided to do my PhD research in this technique. I'm reading about 36 texts of Vedic literature. Each one enlivens a different quality of consciousness. The one I'd like to share with you is a text called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. This will expose you to the organizing power of silence. The quality of this text is unifying. This means that this text has the ability to settle the impulses of our mind till we come into contact with that field of unification of all diversity. You're welcome to close your eyes and just listen. Maharshi Patanjali Pranitam Yoga Darshanam Pratamah Padaha Atha Yoganushasanam Yogaschitta Vritti Nirodha Tadadrashtu Svarupe Vasthanam Vritti Sarupyam Itaratra Vrittaya Panchataya Klishta Klishtaha Pramana Viparyaya Vikalpanitra Smritayaha Pratyakshanumanagama Pramanani Viparyayo Mityajnanam Tatrupa Pratishtham Shabdajnananubhati Vastushunnyo Vikalpaha Abhava Pratyaya Lambana Vrittir Nidra Anubhuta Vishaya Sampramosha Smriti Abhyasa Vairagnyabhyam Tannirodha Tatra Stito Yatno Bhyasaha Satu Dirghakala Nairantari Satkara Sevito Dredha Bhumi. This is the ultimate music. This is the music of nature, of our own consciousness. Now you are a part of this story, and I invite you to meet me at allfromsilence.com.